Well, I hope you're doing this based on sort of question and answers.
Yeah, some of your notes, but start, like Gary said.
Started in high school. I want to know what it was like to be in high school. Did you think about the war much? Did you know you were going to be in it?
Well, I don't think that we really gave a lot of thought. I can remember the study hall I was in on the third floor of the East High School when it was announced that Hitler had invaded Poland, I think, or Czechoslovakia. Poland, I think, is where it started. Anyway, of course, life just sort of went on. You know, nothing changed at first because of the fact that nothing happened until December 7th of 41, because we had an awful lot of people that didn't want this country to get into another world war like it had been in 1917. So a lot of people were much against it. But of course, when 41 came, now that's several years later, I suppose almost maybe 2.5 or almost 3, because it started, I think, Hitler, it was in September or late in the summer when they invaded.
Labor Day weekend.
You know, and so that, of course, became a factor, and there was conversation by the teachers of what was going on, but of course, very few of our teachers were old enough to really know what occurred. Excuse me. So it just kind of went on. Well, in December, and cars, you kept making cars and things of that sort. They only made a handful of 1942 cars because they came out in the fall, and they terminated any civilian production after December 7th of 41. And that's why the 46 automobiles look like 42s. made on the same equipment that they'd stored somewhere, and that sort of thing. But you need to
Tell them about 41, what you did.
Well,
It's Sunday of 41.
on December 7th of 41, which was the summer of Pearl Harbor, the Sunday of Pearl Harbor, several of our friends, neighbors, were old enough to drive or had access to a car, because we were all, I'd have to think, but pretty close into that price. And I got a driver's license when I was 14, because that was possible, because I was supposed to drive my grandfather around. And the judge you had to see in Judge Proctor in the courthouse, who happened to be our neighbor at the cottage at Lake Monona, so that helped. So I got a daylight driver's license. But anyway, Bill Van Meter, they were next door. They had Van Meter's car, and so we all went up town by the Wisconsin State Journal newspaper office and production, which was just one block off the square, behind Felton's, by the way. And and we bought papers. You know, they were, I'm not sure, but I think they were maybe 3 cents a copy or something like that. And these were the extras. They were extra. And And so we went out on it was the outer belt line at that time, in the corner of Femrite Corner, as they called it, where Monona Drive and the Beltline Highway at that time. Of course, I don't think they call it that. They call it the 4-lane highway or something like that. But anyway, they had in these days they would have a plate in the highway which cars would run over to change the light.
Does that have a little switch on it or something?
It was switched. It was electronic. So in the car, many times they would have the lesser traveled street would be stopped, and the main highway would be left to go. So anyway, a couple of us would go up there, and if we saw a car coming, we'd jump on this thing and stop it. And then we would run over to them with our newspaper in hand, you know, this is extra, and about Pearl Harbor. And of course, we sold, I think, everyone that we were able to stop. Came up with a nickel for the paper until some busybody that ran the filling station on the corner called the cops. So that kind of didn't take long to end our endeavor there.
They didn't get a ticket though.
But yeah, we didn't get arrested or a ticket or anything. There must have been about 5 of us. And so, about the safety factor and all of that, we had to listen to, and how dangerous that was, and startling drivers coming the other way because they didn't see any cars. Well, anyway, that was our first day of the war. But anyway.
Did you make any money?
Well, money,
2 cents.
you know,
2 cents.
a daily paper was 3 cents normally, and so we got a nickel for each one. And I suppose we did, because, you know, we didn't have any money much in those days. We were talking about pennies, nickels, and dimes. And like I've often said since, nothing really has changed. All we've added is zeros to our money. Yeah, just no value. We just made a bigger number. So a millionaire in those days was a rich guy. A millionaire nowadays is no big deal.
So you enlisted.
Well, what I just described was 2 years before I got out of high school. Got out of high school in 43, in the spring of 43. And we had, of course, we were the usual big deals of graduating from high school, you know, the seniors. But we had the usual affairs, class nights, and then graduation night. I think it was graduation night, or was it class night?
We know that.
Oh, okay.
Just we're talking about you.
What do you want to know?
So when did you enlist?
Well, that actually, as best I can remember, in school they would have the senior boys and offered us a class. They call it ASTP, Army Specialized Training, and the war was still moving along pretty well. I mean, it was roaring along, if you want to call it that, but the Allies were moving well up into Europe, and but anyway, we were offered this, and most of us took it, and when they put us in the university. In my case, it turned out to be the University of Wisconsin, so I didn't get very far from home. But and we took engineering courses there until till you became 18, or in our group case was in December of 43. And then we were all sent to Fort Benning, Georgia, which is the infantry school, and for basic training and things of that sort. Well, when we were completed that and we were ready to go back to school, they ended that program because they really needed a lot more cannon fodder than they did second lieutenants. So that took care of that part of it. Well, so then we were moved. They were activating or reactivating the 106th Infantry Division. It was in existence, I do believe. And so we went into the normal things of an infantry division. I think we ended up in Camp Atterbury, Indiana, which was kind of handy. It was relatively close to home, and if you worked it right, you could get on a nickel plate railroad. That was the name of the railroad, out of Indianapolis to Chicago, and you'd get on the train sometime in the Friday night, and then you get in Chicago in the wee hours of the morning. It was daylight, but at that time, because it was in the summer, and then I could catch a train to Madison, and then reverse that on Sunday, and back we go, and get there pretty late in the night or early in the morning for service in the morning. You know, I was assigned to a company. I think it was Company A of the 422nd or 423rd Infantry, the battalion. And I was in the company of light machine guns and 60 millimeter mortars, and we trained on that, along with the fact that we had to qualify on all types of light arms, from the 50 caliber machine gun down to a pistol, and you had to qualify on all of those, and which is pretty handy because down the road a piece, you never really knew for sure what you were going to end up being armed with. In my case, my service was a little bit different in that my dad had encouraged me to take typing in high school, which was strictly a girls' class. You know, the boys didn't take.
Why did he do that?
Well, he
Did
said,
know what was going to happen?
no, but he just said that it's so handy to be able to do that, because he had a little old typewriter and he was an accountant, so it was very handy to do that, where most everything else was done by hand, if any, for any of the men. Very few men typed, unless you were in the newspaper business or something like that. So, anyway, what happened is we got into the 106th there, and anybody type at all? I said, oh, pen and pick, you know, and I graduated from the course, and what did we have to do? I forget how many words a minute you had to be able to do, and the typewriters were all mechanical, and which you see in museums nowadays. There were no electrics or anything like that. Well, so I would work started out helping out in the supply room. And of course, most of it was cards. It was sort of hunt and peck. So it worked out pretty good. You know, you'd wheel it up and down and side to side and push the little lever down and it'd go wherever you wanted it. And you punch a number or whatever. Well, then the captain's office, which the command office, if you want to call it that, for the company, they got onto that there was someone else that could type. So that helped. And then also one of the little things that was a little extra is that I got to know everybody in that end of it, where most of it, the dog faces never knew anybody but the platoon sergeant and the company sergeant. But well, there was little benefits to that. Well, then we had a gentleman by the name of Corporal Metz, M-E-T-Z, and when he turned 39, they allowed people, if you turned 39 in the service and weren't overseas, they discharged you and sent you home. So he got discharged and sent home, and I was kind of a loose one. You know, I wasn't really set up in the company. I did have to go out and train with them some, but never a lot of it, not day after day type of thing. And when I did qualify on all of these things, I was initially armed with a 45 caliber Colt pistol, which is sort of a big deal because you didn't have to haul around a big rifle. Well, then they came out with what they call a carbine. So then all of us were then armed with carbines, which was a much better arm. You could hit a lot better than you could with a big old pistol. Although, as a side, I got rid of the carbine when we got over there really doing business, because an M1 rifle was a lot better, fiercer weapon than a carbine was. So, unfortunately, there were rifles and rifle belts around. You could just take it off a body and then it was yours. And so, but I really never used that much either, because I ended up for a very short period of time on a 30 caliber machine gun.
You aren't overseas yet, so.
I'm in the war. That's what happened. But of course, I'm getting way ahead of myself.
Let's go overseas.
So, going overseas, once we got set up and trained, we moved out to a camp in a camp for shipping out in Massachusetts, Taunton, Massachusetts. And we were just consolidated. They washed out several, whatever guys just weren't going to be able to do it and had other problems. And so we were re-outfitted there with all new equipment, new uniforms, and all that kind of stuff. And then we put us on a train and sent us down to New York. And the train, in the daylight, or they had the shades all down in the trains because they didn't want the general public to know who was on there and where you're going.
Why is it?
Well, if you had any spies around, here comes another troop shipment. Well, they took us to the port of New York and put us on the Queen Elizabeth. No, it was not like you might think, but it was a nice big ship, and it was a kind of a smooth rider on a rough sea. So we didn't probably have as much seasick problem as some of the regular little troop ships. And it only took us 6 days to get over there. It took me 14 days to get home, but anyway, we ended up, and we had to we couldn't land in southern England where we were destined for. We went to Greenock, Scotland, because the harbor, we needed a big harbor to handle this ship. But the ship itself, all of the luxury of the Queen Elizabeth days, of course, was all out of there, and we had hammocks 7 high. I believe it was 7. And so it was some trick, you know, to get up there and get down again, because they were just hooked on the end, and you crawled up there. But anyway, it was a short haul. And then we trained for a couple of weeks further, and further consolidated the company and the battalion and so on. And then one late afternoon, and I can't remember if we always had a weapon, but we didn't always have ammunition for it. And because of a lot of the training and stuff, there could be too many accidents, and so they didn't do that. But we, of course, did a lot of training with live ammunition when back in the States, and a lot of rifle training. And boy, you trained until you could use it, until you could hit something, which certainly was a benefit later on. And for what it's worth, the Germans didn't have that much training, because it was amazing how much blazing away they did and didn't hit us. But our guys were trained well enough, and in fact, there was write-ups from time to time where some of the German officers complained that the U.S. soldiers were so good that a big share of the hits were headshots. I mean, you shot them in the head and you killed them. And so it was this part of the difference of kind of training that we got. We were well trained.
What did they complain about?
They were too good.
Well, they were complaining that their own men were not trained well enough. You know, that we had a higher percentage of wounded than the Germans did, because we killed them more often because of the accuracy of the shooting. Well, that's one of the little things that probably you never heard about.
No, why didn't you just get out of the war?
Yeah.
So did you get to sharpshooter status, or what was your?
Oh yeah, that's sure.
Sniper?
I got expert rifleman. Oh yeah, they had riflemen and an expert rifleman, and then a lot of us got, because I trained on all that stuff. You know, I had to qualify just like everybody else, and then of course you had what they call the infantryman's badge, or it had I don't know kind of what you call it, but an extra half circle on the thing for combat infantryman's badge, which you have, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But that
Yep.
Rosler thing,
Right.
that's what the difference is. We were, when we landed in France, which I believe was Le Havre, we just went a little bit inland and set up camp in a farm field. And this was in the fall. It had the fall rains, so it was a pretty muddy mess to get around, because you know, when you got a little city, if you want to call it that, in a dirt field or a sod field or an old cornfield or wheat field or whatever, it gets pretty sloppy. So that was somewhat of a problem with wet feet. And they issued us 4-buckled galoshes. We call them boots now, but they were 4-buckle, not 3, and heavy duty. So, and they were a big help, I'll tell you. But you know, you could get stuck. It's a good thing they were buckled on good, or you lose them, type of thing. But so we were there a week or two, maybe.
Did you run into any of the French people there?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
the guy that, you know, I'm now the mailman and have been. So I'm a kind of a loose cannon in a sense, because I didn't have any. I was alone. You know, I didn't have any partners or friends or buddies much, because they were all back in the company, and I was sort of a loner. But anyway, I made friends with this cook, and he could speak French. So we did sneak out a couple of times, and we took stuff with us. He out of the cook's tent area, coffee came to us in 50-pound bags. So he would pour the coffee, but he'd leave about, if you could picture a 50-pound bag, about like so, about this much in the bottom. And that's quite a lot of coffee. And so then he and I got out, managed to steer clear of the mud, and went to a farm nearby. And we had to kind of dodge, get in and out, because there was the roads going by us, and you had guards walking back and forth, and you know, they'd start out here and they would cross and go this way, and that's how they'd go. So we would wait here until they come and passed us and we're going away and we're halfway along, then we'd zoop across the street, road.
What were they guarding? Did
Yeah.
keep you in?
I think so.
Guess it didn't work.
And yeah, you had guards everywhere. Every time you did anything, you had a post guard and walk guard and all of this. But anyway, so these people were very nice to us, and they had a product called Calvados, and it's kind of like a fruit wine. Well, most wine is fruit, but it's kind of a wine drink, and pretty strong. And it tasted pretty good, you know. It was cold, you know, on that place, and because this is now getting down into November. So anyway, we were there a couple of weeks, and then of course the kids from around there, in the daytime, they'd come up by the fence, and of course we scrounged every old candy or anything we could think of, and we'd have those French kids singing the French national anthem. It was just amazing. These little kids. And then we would, of course, pass on everything we get our hands on. And but trying to put that all together. So we'd screw around over there half the night, you know, and he could talk with them well. They could speak English a wee bit. So that was kind of a little extra. And by that time, I was a corporal, you know, because I was a mailman. I was a T corporal. That means a technical corporal. That's as low as you can get and be a non-com. Can't be no lower. But so then they put us on trucks, the big canvas covered trucks. And trying to think how many we could. I don't remember the number anymore, but you know, sat down each side of it on a board, a seat folded up if they're going to carry materials, or it folded down if you're going to carry bodies. And so you couldn't see nothing out of there. the only guy that could see anything was the last guy, and then of course that was the coldest seat in the truck. You know, that guy.
Nobody wanted that.
Nobody wanted that one, but but then they would stop occasionally because it was so cold, and our feet would be so cold. But if you get out, you know, if you get out and stop, not too hard because you don't want to hurt your feet, but stop around, eventually you'd have the blood forced to the lower extremities, and that did help a lot. So I just don't remember, but it seemed to me we made this trip in a day. We didn't stop long, and they drove like mad. So I don't think we stayed out overnight. We ended up in Western Germany, and in Germany, at where they were in the Siegfried Line, and studied any of that. After World War I, the French built this Maginot Line, which was a big line of fortifications between them and Germany Germany built the Siegfried Line. The only problem is, the line ended, so the Germans ran around the end, through Holland. And so that didn't help much as it really got going. They ran over France in a hurry, if you remember, as they moved clear down into South Africa eventually, Tunisia and places like that. But by this time, all of the Italian thing was over, and the South Africa, and the Allies were up into Germany, in Luxembourg, and that sort of thing. But being kind of a loner, I ended up in one of the pillboxes with the command people, and the captain and the officers and different things. So that was a pretty decent billet, if you want to call it that. I had kind of a canvas thing to sleep on instead of the dirt, and the pillbox was warmed kind of like a barn, you know, just the bodies in there. And but you had to run the ventilator once in a while because we didn't have any lights, obviously. So they took shoe grease and made a wick in it and light it, but of course it smoked like mad. And then the Germans had a kind of an interesting ventilating system. It had a big crank on it. I don't know if any of you know what a milk separator crank looks like, but it's, you could two-handed, they get this thing going, and it was a big flywheel, and you had to take your turn on the crank to kind of keep ventilation going there.
So this was a German pillbox?
Yeah. And we were in that German pillbox. One of them that didn't get blown up.
And what city was it near? What was it? Any idea?
No idea. We had no idea where we were or where we were going. And the weather was so crummy that you never had enough sun to really know, or sky or a moon or anything.
What direction was it?
Yeah, you just didn't know. And then when you do all these traveling and the roads were this way and what have you, pretty soon you have no idea which way you're going at all because you're in this canvas-covered truck. But we're up there maybe a week or 10 days or so. Germans were right across the valley, just like across here, but not so far. And we'd shoot at each other with artillery and hope maybe we hit something, and they would do the same to us. And so you had to be a little careful, because with good field glasses and stuff, or telescopes, the little things like so, you could see people over there, and I'm sure they could see us too. But it was too far to shoot a rifle or something like that and do any good. but they would run in artillery from time to time, and mortars, and but mortars, we were a little far from mortars, but so one morning, not very far along the line here, I'd gone looking for mail. I thought, well, there ought to be, maybe by now, some mail catch up, because I have yet to deliver mail after England. And so I thought, well, when I came back, everything was a hustle around there, and the guys were running. And there had been a lot of action that night from the other side. We knew there was stuff going on over there because people that would, German civilians would try to get through the lines because they knew there was sure going to be a battle around here somewhere, and they would rather be behind our lines instead of the German lines. Because up to this point, the Germans were backing up and were in trouble. Well, this is the Battle of the Bulge, which has started. This is now the 15th or the 16th of December, and now had been cloudy and rainy and crummy, and no visibility hardly at all. Some snow, and it was getting pretty cold. Well, but trying to get this so the continuity is right. But they forced, anyway, that night you could see a lot of activity and a lot of lights. And normally you don't have any lights anywhere on the front lines. And they were already starting to attack us. But they didn't start right across from us. They were a little further off one way or the other. So, but you could see they had these huge lights, and they were shining them on the clouds, which were in turn reflecting back, because now we're in the woods, and this battle is taking place in the woods. So there's as many trees as there are soldiers, and so it's a totally different thing than when you see these pictures, war pictures and stuff of that sort, where you see the tanks running around. Well, there wasn't much in the way of roads, and less trails and things of that sort. So they were, of course, heading and trying to overrun us. Well, we didn't get out in time, so we spent, it was late in the afternoon of the 18th of the 19th, I'm not sure now, then we were surrendered. But we ran around trying to get out and escape, but everywhere we'd go, we would see the Germans already ahead of us. And then we go back around, and of course this thing was sort of closing in to the point where finally we were just plain overwhelmed. Now, at the last day, when we were relatively close contact, we were occupying quite a lot of pillboxes around. And we don't know if the Germans dug them or our guys dug them or what, but you know, they would have to get out, and just like we had to get out. And so we would be in pillboxes for a while, here or there, and then of course as the Germans closed in more and more, it got more violent, louder. War is pretty noisy, and then the shelling, we were being shelled, but from their artillery from behind us, and our artillery was being beat to death by them too.
They had better equipment, better.
Well,
trucks,
no, not really.
Trucks.
But we're on the run, so you can't. You don't have the choice. you're just reacting to everything that's coming down on you. And we were so overwhelmed. It's kind of hard to describe. They're coming through the woods, and it was, they were just like everywhere. And no, I was on a truck, and then we had a machine gun on the truck, and the guy that was running it was hurt or killed, and so there was another guy and I that were supposedly running it for a very short period of time, because we got knocked out of there too, and in fact our truck got tipped over because the tank was coming and with the big cannons, and they didn't hit us, but they hit not very far away, and it tipped the truck over. And so but I banged up both thumbs pretty bad, and they give me trouble now, but I managed. Well, but my personal problems was when we were in some of these pillboxes, when they were running artillery on us, it comes over and like so. We're down in these pillboxes, so normally anything that goes off at ground level, we're below it. And of course artillery is metal that, it got explosive inside, and it all blows apart, and then the shrapnel blows all over the place, along with trees, limbs, roots, dirt, sand, rocks, and I know that we took a real beating from the dirt, because you got to kind of look out once in a while. You can't just scoop down in there and let them run over you, and so we had to be able to get out and run, and so you get it in the face pretty good. And I wasn't wearing glasses in those days, and so I was sort of kind of halfway blind for a while. And then the other thing you had to watch out for, you had to keep your eyes out there pretty regular, because with tanks, ours too, if you can picture the track of a tank, and their tanks were huge compared to ours, and they'd come along and they'd run over with one track over the hole, and then they'd stop that track. You know what I mean by the track. They'd stop it, and the other one would keep going, and that track would just bore down into the hole and just crush, just chew you up. So you had to be alert to the fact that you didn't want one too close to you, or if you saw them near close, you had to do something. You couldn't just stay there. And then of course they got machine guns too. So if you get out and run, now you're out in the open, and you're dodging around trees, and of course the trees, obstructed the tanks too. Tanks can knock a tree down, but they don't knock a tree down that's this big around. So they had to get around, and so you had to kind of time it, and we only had a couple of those situations. But the other problem with these holes, you didn't want to get too far from a tree, because the tank could get in there. But if you were up too close to the tree, artillery would hit in the tree and go off up there, and that would pick you right out of the hole. That's what they call tree bursts. And so that shrapnel, instead of just being on the ground, would be up here and would go down in the hole. So these are some of the little things that you had to learn pretty quick. Of course, we're trained over this,
you were?
to be. This was no surprise.
Oh.
And was quite a shock, but when the first time, and none of us had had any experience, or hardly didn't know what a German gun sounded like, because they sounded different than ours. And but when you get up there, and we had a lot of frightened guys, including me, you know, because you just didn't quite know which way to go. Our officers weren't any better. I mean, they had the same problems we had, and we weren't getting any information from the back because their artillery was knocking out everybody, and half of the guys that were with us were medics, cooks, all of that kind of support troops. You got them. Hey, find a rifle, and now you are one, a soldier. You're up front now, and you're not making coffee no more. And, so it was just a mass confusion. Well, finally it got to the point where there were so many Germans, and the group was so compacted, they finally surrendered. And they come really running around with white flags and telling everybody, don't be a hero, because they got all the advantage.
Lay down your arms.
Just lay down everything, and otherwise they're just going to slaughter us. They did enough of that as it was. So anyway, that's sort of how that went. So now we're in a big, I'm trying to think, but we were enclosed somehow now, whether it was a big farm field or just what, I don't know. And then they had guards, German guards with machine guns. Germans had a lot more machine guns than we did, or automatic weapons, but they had much poorer rifles. And so it helped even out things, because if you got a scatter gun, you can blow all over the place. You're going to hit something. Where ours was much better refined, our guys would actually aim and shoot, and many times hit something. And so that was the advantages there. Well, so now there we sit. Fortunately, when on the 16th, when we had to get out of there, they said, don't take any equipment, just take warm clothes and your overcoat and your weapon, and out you go. And so that's all we had, and because there was no way of hauling anything other than ammunition, and so that.
That's not when you grab the pancakes.
Well, yeah, one of the little things, I'm condensing this into all these days into, 30 minutes so far. Well, they had brought breakfast up to our company, and they had these insulated deals. They weren't like we have today, but they worked pretty good. And there was a load of pancakes had come up, as was the breakfast. So when they went out of there, I had to go past that. And so I did grab all the pancakes I get a hold and put them in my field jacket pocket. So that kept me going those 2-3 days in there. A little sandy, but it sure beat nothing.
That's right.
And so that was one little thing that was helpful. Another thing that I passed by is that when we were in Taunton, Massachusetts, getting outfitted, they took away anything that we might have had that was not OD colored, because you didn't want stuff floating around the countryside or be visible. what I had done is I had 2 pairs of sweat socks, white sweat socks. So I put them in a paper bag, and then this camp was all sand, so I went out, I buried it outside the barracks until after inspection and all of the rest of it.
Where was this?
Taunton, Massachusetts,
Massachusetts, okay.
where we were shipping out from. And then I put those down in my shirt. Just as a skinny little kid, you know, it didn't look like a woman, you know, with the socks all wadded up in there. But I put them in so they were flat, and 2 pair. And little did I know what a benefit that turned out to be. Because now, after we finally get through this first cold night, and a lot of us couldn't hardly walk because our feet were numb and pretty sore by now, because the frostbite was the early part of frostbite. And but the next morning, then of course they roused us out, and we're all trying to help the ones that couldn't hardly function. As we know, if we left them behind, they'd shoot them. And I just don't know, but I know they marched us to a railroad and put us on these little European railroad cars. They're not biggies like we have. And too many and too little space. And you had to take turns standing up or sitting down or lying down. So it every so often shift, like to move. And we ended up at Stalag 9B. Stalag is a word for prisoner of war camp. And 9B at trying to think of the town. It was around a place called Gerolstein, Geralstein, or something like that. And they had barracks there that were kind of like regular barracks that you would think. The beds, the bunks or whatever, they were 3 high, one virtually on the floor, and then another one and then another one. And but the ones on the floor were so cold, and so we ended up doubling up. And these beds were, if you want to call it that, were kind of narrow, and then they had slats in them, and then they had like a straw mattress. There was a mattress cover filled with straw, what they were. And of course you'd sleep either one side. You couldn't lay on your back or your belly because there wasn't room enough. And then you could, so you'd either both lay on right side or have to finally say shift. Then you turn the other way for a while because it wasn't very soft. And for the longest time, I had, stretch marks on both sides, just like after a pregnant woman. You know, from where they make those, you know, how the skin, well, just like the women, you know, but so that's of course why you had to keep turning every so often. And of course there wasn't much light, so you pretty well knocked off at sundown or a little after, sit and chit-chat some. And then they roused us out pretty early in the morning. They would bring us, the first thing they would bring, so-called food. They had wooden wash tubs, just like we used to have, you know, with a row panel and
Oh, yeah.
that sort, you know, about this big around. And they, the more able then would come in with, well, I don't know how many because there was different areas. They'd come in with a tub of that. Most of us still had our canteens. So we had a canteen cup. You'd get about a half a canteen cup of what they call coffee, which was a burnt barley product. They must have burnt barley and then brewed it. The only thing I could figure out. But it was warm, not hot, because by the time they cooked it or boiled it, when it got to us, there'd be a little delay in there. So that was it. And then, trying to think, there was something at noontime, but I just don't really remember. It was kind of we used to call it pine needle soup, because it had things in it that looked like pine needles. It wasn't, of course, because pine needles is like turpentine. But so we had that, and supposedly there was supposed to be some meat in it, but I never found any. No. You could see that there was bones in the bottom of the thing after they got done dishing it out, so it had something. But and then late in the afternoon, and then I'll interject here. The only heat we had, the primary heat we had, was just the number of bodies that were there. But being as poorly fed, I don't think you gave off the amount of heat that you would if, you know, like a meal like today. Anyway, so we had that. So yeah, so far we've had virtually nothing, you might say. Well then, late in maybe 4 o'clock possibly, they had a bakery there, and they made some kind of bread. It was very dark in color. And you know, you go to the grocery store and you buy like brown bread. They come in a smaller loaf, maybe this high, and by so. I have to think a minute to put it in perspective, because depending on how many they had managed to bake that day, they would come in and then they would divide us into anywhere from 5 to 7. You 5 get this loaf, and you 7 get that loaf another day, depending on how much they baked. Well, then what we did, and it was very difficult, we didn't have really anything to cut with, but one guy, a different guy each day, would be designated to cut it into, can you get me the water over there, into the designated number of slices. My glass is right here. No, the one next to it. Great, yeah. Would be good to to ask questions. Thank you. Are we back on the air? Mm-hmm. Anyway, so And you cut it as best you could because the guy that did the cutting got last choice.
Oh.
So you can see he did the best he could. And that was it. Well, that's today. And just for what it's worth, I weighed 156 pounds when I went in there, and I weighed 95 when I got out.
So how many days were you in this?
101 days.
You were in prison.
And,
Then you started marching. Oh, when did you faint?
well,
Pretend.
this was, what I'm describing was very similar, and I was in two different camps, in Stalag 9A and Stalag 9B, but at 9B first. So, and then after 2-3 weeks, I think, they separated the non-coms, which I just made with my T corporal, and then the rest of the non-commissioned officers, we were separated out and shipped over to Stalag 9A, and which
Why were you being shipped out?
I don't know why they separated us out, but anyway, the 9B, the first one, was about 70 miles, I think, west, basically, of Berlin. And I just don't remember. I've seen it on the maps, and we have a German couple belong to the Optimus Club, and he brought in information one day to help me locate where I was. And then, then the 9A then was about 70 miles south of Berlin. And that was at Kassel. Well, so things were about the same in both places. We finally, body lice was a problem because, of course, I wore the same clothes when I got captured as when I got out. So 3.5 months later, almost 4 months later. But 2 different times while I was incarcerated, we had we got deloused. We stripped down totally, and our clothes would be put in a kind of a steam tent, and then they would get steamed heavily, and that would kill all the living lice. But of course, the eggs, yet it wouldn't necessarily kill them. And then we would go through what they call it a kind of a shower affair, which was like if you put a blanket over a clothesline like you used to do for the kids to make a tent, it was kind of like that. And then we would parade through there with the water running on us and trying to, wash as best you could without soap or anything. And of course it was cold when you come out the other end. But that helped. And then one of the things we did do oftentimes, particularly right after one of these deals, is we would sit around and we would pick lice out of a wool sweater. Out of wool. Wool has got body to it, so you have to pick at it and try to get the eggs out as best you could. Oh, that was one of the things. We didn't have anything to do. The reading material that we got had come from the British, because the British had been prisoners there a lot longer than we had. And so all of the reading material were British stories. At least they were in English, and so we could read them. But I'm trying to think of the famous English author that did quite a. But so I read quite a lot of her stories and her novels, different things.
Louise
And
Alcott?
pardon?
Louise Alcott, or?
No. That's, anyway. But
you have any playing cards or anything like that?
There may have been some, but certainly not enough to do much of anything that I could remember. We did get, supposedly, we were supposed to get a Red Cross box each month, each person. Well, that really never happened. The best I ever got there, I had to share with 3 other guys. Or the other one was, I think, 5 others, four others. Either I think we had 1 for 4 box and 1 for 5, 2 different times. So I always felt that there was a lot of German pilferage there. Because the Germans were in tough shape.
What were in the boxes? Red Cross.
Oh boy, trying to think. Isn't that funny? I'm having a hard time. But I know there was something with pits in it, maybe prunes. And I know that if you crack a prune pit, there's a little edible thing inside, a nut inside of that, by the way.
Seed.
Found that out.
A seed, probably.
A seed, yeah, right, inside of the pit. But they were hard to crack because we didn't have anything to do it with very much. But we managed to get them open, get that little bit of pit out of there. The camps themselves, both of them, had tripwires. In effect, you had a barbed wire fence, double, maybe 10 feet. Fence was maybe 8 or 10 feet apart, and then it had what we call barbed wire entanglement, this big rolls of barbed wire in there. In between these fences were 10, 12 feet high, and they were in such a material they're very difficult to climb. It isn't like a nice big square fence where you could climb right over it.
Did many people try and escape?
No.
Where would you go?
Yeah, well, that's the problem. There were efforts made on long-term prisoners to escape and stuff of that sort, but not much. And then there was this compound. It had, of course, a machine gun tower on each corner, and plus every so often along the fence. So so inside of that fence, and about 2 feet, 3 feet in, was a single wire string or some rope or something, and that was there. So if you got up to it or inside of it, they'd shoot you. From one of the towers. So you didn't do that, and they didn't warn you either. If you got too close or right up by it, they might take a rifle shot near you and hit the ground by you. So that was a possibility.
Paying attention to me.
But anyway, that was some of the security things they had there. They marched you out, and in the first prison camp, they counted you twice a day. They run you out in the morning, and then again at night, and late in the afternoon. And the morning it was somewhat late, so you couldn't do a lot of fooling around. But the late one, if it got a little late and it got a little dark, and you were 2 or 3 lines up, and our guards were mostly elderly, and so they'd go along and down the line and count, and then the guy would move in another line. And then he'd count, and he'd be one or two short, or he'd be over. And so, and we're lucky we didn't get shot.
Why'd you do that for?
They'd get so frustrated.
Why did you do that?
Well, for the hell of it, just to harass them. But no, that was just simple things like that, The amount each section of barracks that was closed off, wasn't connected directly to any, had a little stove. And they weren't much of a stove. They only stood about that high. They reminded me of a four-holer laundry stove. Remember, I don't know if you remember, but a lot of homes had a little gas stove in the basement so you could boil, and a copper boiler so you could do your laundry. A lot of homes, I'm sure you're aware of, that didn't have water heaters. You heated water on the stove or in a tub or what have you. Well, so anyway, so they would take wood cutting crews out on the privates and the PFCs, had to work or were subject to that. And you were allowed as much wood as one man could carry back. So you always tried to get the sturdiest, healthiest one we had to carry the wood. But it still didn't really do a lot. But if we did get it going at all, we would put our little slice of bread on the stovetop and heat it up or cook it a little bit. The one other incident in the second camp, the best I can remember, the camp was built on a hilltop. The fence, if you were on the very top of this mound, the top of the fence was below you. Can you just picture like a hill and then the fences around here? And so, in the town, must have been Castle, if I can picture. These two camps kind of blend together now. It's a long time ago. But there was a rail junction a little ways down from us. We could see it. We all had good eyes in those days. Mine had started to heal up pretty good. But a P-47, which is a big fighter, would come by from time to time, most every afternoon actually, and drop a bomb in there, in that rail junction. And for a while, our privates and PFCs, who supposedly got a little more food, were marched over there to help put it back together. Well, the only problem is they did so much sabotage, they didn't really do that a long time, because they did every little thing you could think of, where it cave in or something, where the train came by and the track would sag, so they quit doing that, or quit taking our people down there. They didn't trust them. Rightfully so. But anyway, one day when this guy come by with his bomb, the people in the guard towers, which were really sort of too far away, opened up on him with their machine guns. And obviously the guy and the fighter knew what was happening, because he came around. Now this thing has a number of 50 caliber machine guns on them, and the 50 caliber slug is bigger than my thumb. And so he came around and went after those towers. And of course, when supposedly we were all supposed to, nobody was to be outside when there was any activity around, including that airplane. Well, these guys jumped out of those towers and into the barbed wire entanglements, because that was a lot softer than the ground. You know, the towers are up pretty good, you know, and that'd have killed them, you know, if they'd have jumped out on the ground, chances are. But he had a few wild shots there, and so we had those slugs coming through the building. And the center of there'd be barracks, there'd be one section of it here. Then there was a cement thing with cold water, if you had guts enough to take a cold water shower, and then there'd be another barracks over here. We were not connected at all. Well, when those slugs came through and hit that cement and bounced again, they were all over the place. And but it was an interesting afternoon, put it that way.
Any
And
prisoners?
I don't know what, if any, prisoners were injured or killed. None in our little section. But they made some holes in the roof, and those slugs were around there.
So when did you do this painting?
Okay, that's the beginning of the end.
I ask one question, were the British in separate barracks from
Right.
you?
Yes.
Everybody, were there any other nationalities?
French, Moroccans, there were a number of wherever Germany had, Polish, Czechs.
Well, how many prisoners were there approximately? Thousands and thousands?
Well, hundreds and hundreds maybe. But I don't really know, because I never really got where I could see the whole thing. We were free in there, but you can't tell from inside, or in the compound, other than it was a fair size, and quite a lot of people, and a lot of them had been there a long time. But anyway, when the war was really winding down, in a sense, or heating up, and I'm trying to put a time frame to it. But anyway, they were going to march us out of there, so they got us all out in the main street of the camp there, and opened the gate, and out you go. Well, we were really in kind of bad shape, and we had planned for a number of us, the real skinny ones, like me. I was skinny to start with, and then you'd faint, say pass out, call for a medic, stuff of that sort. The risk you took, they could have shot us just as well as not. But we think that because most of the guards were somewhat older, and they realized the war was over, and we don't think they were real Nazis. So they finally, the commander of our little section, said, everybody back inside. So then the ones that were on their feet grabbed the rest of us under the arms, and back we go. And it wasn't very long. And I do believe it was Patton's army that came through. Of course, all of us look alike, so I didn't know who they were. And
This guy said it was Pat.
yeah, and I think that's what it was.
On Good Friday, he says.
Could be. But anyway, but they kept us there for a little while, because they didn't have any place to put us, for one thing. But they did start bringing in food. and we weren't restricted. They didn't figure many of us were in bad enough shape that we had to be brought back a sandwich at a time type of thing. And we had virtually, when they started to come in with trucks of food, we had virtually riots. Because now we're all nationalities are running together. And so you're hearing different languages and yelling and they're just overrunning. This poor guy that was up on the truck, he was having an awful time, you know. They all but crawled and dragged him out of there, you know. But I could see there was no way I was going to win this one. So I just stood back a little bit. And well, I did, because a box of crackers, about the size of, about that square and about that tall, like we buy them in the grocery store, except they were in a brown cardboard box and stuff like that. It had got flipped around or tumbled out or what have you and was under the truck. So I worked my way up there and got under the truck and got a hold of it like a football, you know, and wanted to take it away from me. Went back to the barracks with it and shared it with my neighbors there, buddies there. So and when these trucks come in, especially these 3/4 ton trucks, I don't know just what their purpose was. I had a license to drive one, but these guys were doing, but there was a toolbox about this long and about this wide and about this tall, right on the fender and the front end of the running board on the driver's side. And my gosh, you know, there was food in there. I found a nice big fat candy bar in there. And I took a big bite out of it, and then I thought, well, this isn't fair, so I took this back too. So I told them I'll take the part with the bite out of it. But they came in with cigarettes and loaves of bread. You know, it was like angel food cake compared to what we were used to.
Well, before the food, did the Germans surrender to the Americans? I mean,
The Germans that were, you mean, guarding us?
Yeah.
Some must have, but most of them ran away, ran out and ran away.
So you were basically by yourself.
Yeah, we were just there. And I think they had caught several of the lesser nice guards. And I'm not so sure that they didn't have a tough time for a while. And a number of the guys went out and scrounged the neighborhood, but there wasn't much to scrounge. You know, the battle had come through there, and there wasn't much left. And then I think that the people themselves had little or nothing, and apparently they preserved food pretty much like all the rest of us, you know, like in a fruit cellar and stuff of that sort. And there wasn't much there. So it didn't make much sense to go out and pillage the countryside.
So how many days were you there?
Afterward,
Before they moved you?
not many, because they came along relatively soon and trucked us all to the nearest German air base where they had American C-47s, which is a DC-3 type plane, and flew us back to a place called Camp Lucky Strike, where it was a big tent camp.
And where was that?
And in France. not very far from La Havre, in that area somewhere. And it was Camp Lucky Strike, it was called. Those camps were named after cigarettes.
Oh,
But at that camp, they had tents, and they had cots in them. So 8 cots in there, and a little stove. The stove reminded me of a metal beer keg.
yeah.
It was about this big around, about that tall. Had a cutout, of course.
Was it a little warmer than what you had in the...
Well, this was already
April, May.
in March. And so it was a lot warmer, but those little stoves were pretty nice. And then we made, we call them clock springs, but packing bands, where they strap wood boxes and stuff like that. The metal, the bands are about a ½ inch wide roughly, and they put it around each end of the box and pull it up tight and put a clamp on it. So there was quite a bit of that material around. So we would roll it up around a post. So now you got what looked like a clock spring, if you've ever seen a clock spring out of a clock. And so you got a ring of this stuff, and it's like so. Well, we did have access to the Red Cross donut wagons. But too many of those will kill you. They were greasy, but we would put this on the stove, have the stove going pretty good, and then we'd put our donuts on there, and that would fry out quite a bit of the fat. Never got enough food. Plenty of food. We just never got enough, or never felt we got enough. Sometimes there were 3 mess halls, and sometimes we made them all. Go down and see, oh, that looks pretty good, well, that. Go down there and do more, and stuff like that. And I was pretty chubby when I got home.
Well, how long were you in these camps before they shipped you home?
I'm not sure, but several weeks, I think. And we, of course, got re-outfitted. They must have burnt all
Yeah.
everything else.
When did you get a letter home, or to home or from home?
Well, I don't think I got a letter from home ever. No. Oh, you mean in the prison camp? Well, we did get several letters over the years, and I think I was able to send out. And if we did, it's in the trunk.
Probably right here.
Oh,
There's some from France there, all about the mess halls.
all we could think about was food.
I'll bet.
So once you got on the ship to come home,
Okay, well, then they trucked us down to the port of Le Havre, and I put me on called the SS what? Don't remember. But it was an old passenger ship, and there was a lot of us. We were cramped in there and pretty good, and a lot of sleeping on the deck and things of that sort.
You said you were trucked to the SS Argentina.
Argentina.
After
Thank
14
you.
days voyage, you then were in New York.
14 days, was it? Right. No, but what thing I did there, I was not a gambler and not a smoker, not a card player really. So I volunteered to be a night cook's helper on the ship. We cooked with soft coal, the same thing they fired the ship with. And they had these big old cook stoves that just like you all had in the farmhouse type of thing. And my basic job really was cracking eggs, and you get pretty good at it. You get two in each hand, and plump, plump, and you didn't want to have much shells in them either, or they raise hell with you, or sent you back up on deck. But anyway, the neat part of that, one, it was warm in there, and we were kind of free to access to move around. And then, of course, in the daytime, they rushed everybody out, pushed everybody out on deck, except us who worked at night. So we had the whole sleeping area to ourselves. So that helped. And I used to, because the fact that we had British war brides on board, and a bunch of officers and stuff of that sort, they had much better food, and they had fruit, and so they would have by one of the side, one of the doors up on the main deck, where they would put stuff, and then at night they would throw it overboard. I don't know why they bothered to wait at night anymore, because the war was over. They always did that during war, during active wartime. And so they would be long gone from wherever they dumped it. But they have all the stuff parked out there. You can get quite a lot out of a grapefruit. There was grapefruit there, would you believe? Bananas any bad bananas were bad. No, that was no good.
That's why you won't eat a banana now.
I don't like crummy bananas. I like firm bananas. Anyway, so that was quite an advantage for me. I always was a loner all the time anyway. And so I scrounged around and got a little extra. And then, of course, we're down there cooking, so I got all the fried eggs I wanted. And we'd make toast on the stove. Just put it on the top of the stove. Things of that sort. So I had plenty of eating type of thing.
Did your family know you were coming home?
No.
No, but they knew you were out of the camp?
Yeah, I don't know, yes, at what point they knew that I was out. But I got home on VE Day.
Oh!
All the saloons were closed. Not that I cared.
We're missing in action.
What's that? Oh, yeah.
Is that the train Uncle Howard upgraded you on?
Oh, yeah. When, let's see now. When we got off in New York, and they paid us, and we go to the PX, and we could buy a suitcase and odds and ends and stuff of that sort. And then we got on a train and went back to Chicago from New York. And then in New York, or in Chicago, I think it was the Black Hawk Hotel had been commandeered in effect for the GIs. So you could always go, if you went anywhere near Chicago, you could sleep there. You could go to the hotel and just, it wasn't like the next day, of course. But I'd call Howard, and I called Ralph. Uncle Ralph, he was an employee of the Northwestern Railroad. And so they came and met me, and then between them anyway, they put me on the parlor car to ride up to Madison. Well, that was kind of nice. And, but pretty soon I'm home, and they met us at the depot.
This is a letter from the Army, March 13th, 1945. The Provost Marshal General has directed me to inform you that the above named prisoner of war has been reported interned at the place indicated. You may communicate with him by following the instructions. That's when you were in Starline B.
Line B? Well, that was rather early, I thought, but, well, of course, they're trying to get the information out. Are we functioning? Oh. We, so, well, you got any questions? There's got to be a lot of holes in what I said.
You kind of skipped through England pretty fast.
Well, England, we got there, and I'd have to really maybe study some of this to get the time frame. But I didn't go to London, and I didn't go to Paris. I could have, but Paris, I wasn't really feeling good enough. And we didn't really have very much money anyway. But in England, we a fellow by the name of John Franchini, I think it was, that I knew somewhat, and we ran together in the company. I had made contact with some relatives in England. I had written and told, I forget how I handled it, wanted to get Aunt Ellen's address. And so they sent me the address of the name and these people. And so I contacted them by phone. Oh yeah, is there any chance you could come over here? They told me how to do it, what trained to do, and the Gilberts were their name. And but so John and I got on the little train. Everything is smaller. And we chugged up there and found the place. Very gracious people. And of course we took coffee and everything we could snipe and get away with. And for them too. And we had a real nice visit. We were just overnight, and then came back the next day.
You just saw them once?
Yes. Yeah, well, we really weren't there very long. And I know that we went to one of the dances, or several. Well, everything was a dance. They'd have the British girls, and they have these affairs. What did I know about dancing? Well, I don't think I ever went to a high school dance in my life. But let's see that one.
It's the Gilberts.
Oh, that is the Gilberts. I know that one of the girls at one of these dances invited John and I for Christmas. But for Christmas, the Germans invited us first.
Now, these people the Gilberts are who?
They are a shirt-tail relative of our family, somewhere in England. That's down in somewhere in the...
Well, when you wrote for that address, didn't Grandma know where you were headed then?
Well, they knew I was in England.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Well, I said, could I get Aunt Ellen's address?
Yeah.
They knew, and then they sent that information to me. And so that's how we proceeded. And the fact that we were there such a short time. But the war was moving along so fast. And they were going to put our division up for the winter. They figured the winter was forecast to be rather fierce, which it was, and that we were so far into Germany, and they thought Germany had been really beaten already, but they did manage. Hitler was kind of a maniac anyway, and he didn't know he was badly beaten already, and so, and the way they controlled people, you know, if you talk back, you know, they cut your throat, and so, so they had this big buildup opposite us, and we thought we were just there for a soft winter.
Oh.
Didn't work out that way.
No.
So,
So where were you on D-Day? You were still in the U.S., right?
oh yeah, I'm sure it was. And that was June 6th, wasn't it? 1945?
44, 40,
44.
44.
Yeah, 44. Yeah. And, that could have been a lot worse. I could have been there a year earlier. You know? That was an absolute slaughter. Fortunately, Hitler was as nutty as he was. Otherwise, that could have been a greater rout, a much more severe situation. Yeah, I'm afraid the U.S. and the Allies were guilty of a lot of mistakes.
So did you know Mom before you left, right?
Oh yeah, we had met at the graduation and class night. No, we had. And I was kind of sneaky, you know, when Willard and I.
Don't put that on.
And I look back on that and I think, wow, hey, I did pretty good. And she was receptive, so, or I was, whichever the case may be, who's chasing who.
Willard was a friend.
Yeah. Well, what did I know?
Good.
You know, he brought her, you know, and so we technically double dated. So what did I know? Well, when I get home on that furlough, my first furlough, which would have been 40, had to be in the early part of 44, and Willard came to town and came in, and I'd called him, I guess, and because who else would I run with? Everybody's in the service.
Yeah.
But
Here it says you got captured at 3:20 p.m. on the 19th of December.
okay, now
They tried to black it out, but now you can read
Yeah.
it.
Is that a letter to his folks?
Yeah. In April 45, when you're eating and you have the runs.
He was captured at 3.
3:20.
well, Willard had
December 19th,
said that. Oh,
1944.
I hadn't seen Bernadine in a long time. Oh, you know. Oh, what do you know? So well, what are we going to do? I said, well, why don't we go up and see if the sisters are there on 24 East State. Well, we get up there, and here we go there, and there's a sailor in there.
Who was the sailor visiting?
Hey. Well, he had to be in by 10 o'clock. Willard had a car. So we all jump in the car and go out and take the sailor back to Cronsage Halls or one of those out there. And when it comes back to getting in the car, I shove Hazel in the front seat.
Willard.
And Bernadine and I jump in the back seat. So I got up lots of fortitude. I says, how about a date tomorrow night? 7 o'clock, she says.
Don't be late.
Oh, there's how it all started.
That's all the stuff.
Now you know how you got here, Rita.
Gary.
I want to know that.
Mother's Day service.
So what did you do when you got back then? So now you're a soldier, having gone through pretty difficult times. Did you have to get your health back, or your fortitude, or your emotions? How was that?
I didn't have a lot of trouble. I think I may have had some.
You went to R&R in Miami.
Yeah, well, yeah, so they gave a 60-day furlough. 60 days, whoopee! Poor old girl never got 2 hours sleep together. For
Well, you were
60
in Miami that long.
No, I'm just saying, after Howard and sent me home on the train, and Ralph, from Chicago, that was the beginning of a 60-day furlough. So I had 60 days.
This was after Miami then.
No. Then Jack Harrison, who lived up the street from us, was a lieutenant or a captain, and he was home. And he arranged, instead of me taking a train down to Miami Beach, he arranged for me to fly from Truax to Tampa, I think, St. Pete, somewhere there, and then take another flight from there to Miami. So I could stay a few days longer and still get there on time.
Oh.
So that's how I did that.
Now, why did you have to stay, you had a 60-day furlough, then why did you have to go to R&R if you just come off a furlough?
Beats me, but it was okay. I had a good time in Miami. I lived in a hotel, had a room on the front, on the oceanfront room on the Gold Crest Hotel or something like that in Miami. But everybody went. And if in the meantime, if you had a wife or you'd gotten a wife, you could take her. But we did not hurry up and get married. So anyway, that's what happened there.
Tried to talk me into it, though.
Yeah. Right.
No, I don't want to rush into this.
So did Grandma and Grandpa keep you posted on what was going on?
Well, didn't you come down to the depot too to meet me?
Probably.
I think you did.
Probably.
And,
I met you in Chicago at your...
I'm sorry?
I was in Chicago at your uncle's one time.
Oh yeah, I know we did that, but I meant when I first got home
Oh.
from overseas.
I know. Probably did.
I kind of think so. But well, then went to Miami and spent my time there, and then we drove. Another guy had a car, so we drove over to Camp Polk, Louisiana, in his car. We all put the gas in it and what have you, and drove straight through. That's quite a ride. And then I had already then, all prisoners of war received one higher rank and grade and rank, however you say that. So now I'm a T sergeant, technical sergeant, which I wasn't qualified to do that, but, and then,
Staff sergeant, you said.
no, not yet. Cool. Not yet. Well then, and I went, so I'm now the company, I ended up being a company clerk, and very initially for a few days, a assistant to the supply sergeant, and typed a little bit for the company clerk. Well, then the company clerk, he had enough points, so he got discharged. So now I become the company clerk, and I run the typewriter now. And then it wasn't too much later, there's a number of weeks in here, the first sergeant gets discharged. So they quick sent me to first sergeant school. And almost screwed that up because I had a chance to take a furlough before I fully finished that course. And but anyway, they made me the first sergeant of the company. So they immediately gave me one extra rank. Now I'm a staff sergeant.
Oh my.
And then I had to wait a month to get the rest. I would have then become a tech sergeant, and then a first sergeant. But I thought, oh, then comes the paper, and I'm the first one to get any mail. Here it is, a notice to all companies. Any ex-prisoners of war in your group may be discharged upon request if they had 60 days or more incarceration. 3 or 4 days later, I'm home. Didn't take long. I looked it over. I thought, boy, I'm going along here pretty good. And the money was halfway decent at this point. But I really thought, the GI Bill, we knew what that was going to be. Did I really want to spend my life in the service? And I decided, I guess not. So I went home, and pretty soon I had a wife. Not very many. I got home on the 25th of November. I had just turned 20 on the 25th of November, or on the 18th of November. I got discharged on the 20th, 25th. Then 7 months and 5 days later, I had a wife.
Talked you into it, huh?
Yeah. Forever after.
How old were you?
20. Just made 20. So, folks thought I was too young to get married.
Living last.
Do we still have the letter?
We got a letter someplace
And
trying
Dad-
to talk us out.
Dad written on a yellow pad, this, regular. All of the problems.
Yeah, that's not a problem. You have children right away, and then you'll be in trouble. You won't have any money. So we did meet for a while.
So,
End of story.
Any other questions?
now there must have been a bunch of stuff in that we written before that I glossed over.
Not much.
So did I do pretty good?
Yeah.
I think what you'll want to do is fill in the actual names of things. I've written almost word for word what you just said.
Really?
I'm on page 8.
Oh.
Tunnel syndrome yet?
Not a bit. I'm a fast typer.
And I can't type on a laptop keyboard.
This is a little one.
Yeah.
No problem.
Especially painful.
Well, the thing that bothers me a little bit at this late date is, and I want it to be, the same story on every deal, because you forget things or you remember things and it changes, and I kind of wonder. And I started, I read this thing and I noticed a number of things that I probably hadn't said much of.
I didn't have a date on this thing when we did this.
We weren't so good on putting dates on stuff.
Robert,
No.
I got a lot of pictures that we never really dated. What'd you say?
so Congressman Robert Henry, was he a relative? There's this letter here from your parents asking this congressman for help.
Well,
He was probably the congressman.
Oh, he was Wisconsin. Okay, sorry. I thought there was one in here from some senator somewhere.
His parents
oh,
wrote
well, there is stuff
Wrote.
from,
His mother wrote to the senator.
and they,
Wayne Morse.
Well, Wayne
Oh, that
Morris
was
is
a relative.
Marguerite's,
Okay, I'll let you talk to her.
Brother-in-law?
something like that. That's,
Oh. Okay. Hold the phone. Talk to Lee, he's got a nursing issue.
Hi. I'm
got a
good.
red bite
We're
just
having
like
a
you
great
had.
afternoon
What's that?
here.
Has that red bite?
I
like you
typed-
did.
Well, it's just Rita and
Lee
Gary
has a
and
red
my
bike.
mother and Dick and Brandy and me, but we've been typing up your grandpa's stories.
So anybody want to try my
Kind of
dessert?
from the time he went into the war until he
Better have some, that'll be our supper.
The whole time we
Yeah.
typed it, so it'll be something worthwhile.
You got some coffee too?
oh yeah,
I'm sure there's some
that we do.
I think that would be a delightful supper.
Right.
Definitely. So what's wrong with you, Lee?